Welcome to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Hello again, everyone. What a week it's been, and what a week it's going to be, I think. Let me begin with this. First of all, I want to kind of just start this particular episode discussing Joe Kent and a little bit of Charlie Kirk and a little bit of kind of the conversations that have been taking place regarding all of them. And my biggest pet peeve, I think, in the middle of all of this, again, a lot of the gossip that's taking place and the different storylines that are out there, and more importantly, I think a lot of the false belief that exists and the real conversations that are not being had. And this is, I think, again, one of the biggest problems. And it really does center itself around the fake Trump shooting and the fake Charlie Kirk assassination. So let me backtrack real quick, and I'll try to sort of connect all these dots, because I'm certain that intro didn't sound very coherent. That's my fault. Anyway, let's go back in time real quick and just examine one thing here. Tucker Carlson, again, with the existence of his show, he plays dumb regarding a lot of different things when he knows exactly what's taking place. At the exact same time, there are endless conversations that he openly does not have. And that's troublesome because, again, he could have these serious conversations with a massive audience and it would wake people up to a great deal of things. With that aside, he's still doing that. That even if he has a particular guest on, it doesn't mean that the guest that he has on knows what they're doing or knows what they're saying or knows what they're talking about. Again, let's examine first an individual that he had in the past on his show, because I'm starting to see basically a pattern emerge here. And I'm not sure why it's happening necessarily, so I don't have all the answers, but I just find it interesting. I brought up on the show a long time ago a guy by the name of Dan Caldwell. Dan Caldwell worked and was a senior advisor, more specifically, to Pete Hegseth. Again, he was brought over when Hegseth was confirmed for defense secretary. But then he was accused of leaking information to people, and nothing could be substantiated, certainly not publicly anyway. And then Dan Caldwell went on Tucker Carlson's show and described the entire thing. And I watched that whole interview, and he seemed very genuine, and he seemed very honest. Again, a genuine and honest person doesn't mean that they're bad, but it also doesn't mean that they know everything, that they don't understand why things are happening the way that they're happening. So again, you can be a kind person and an honest person and a good person, but not be knowledgeable on the bigger picture. And I think we see that with a lot of Tucker Carlson's guests, or again, endless individuals that are on a lot of these shows. And again, you have to ask yourself what questions are not being discussed and what questions aren't being asked and what conversations aren't being had. So now that Dan Caldwell again was removed, went to Tucker Carlson's show, Dan Caldwell has just been rehired. And he's been rehired by Tulsi Gabbard's Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So again, if he was a leaker of some classified information or bad information or whatever it is, something that would out someone who is, I don't know, good or bad or whatever. If he was doing that in the Pentagon, why would he re-enter the Office of the Director of National Intelligence? So it's pretty clear he's been exonerated. But I think what this highlights is that there are, and it's not him, I don't think, but there are just people that exist within these agencies who are trying to set up people who are patriots and are good people. And if you get enough individuals who don't like said person, and then they team up and they falsify paperwork and then they do whatever, well, when that person is removed, you know exactly who set him up. Or you know again who fabricated paperwork in order to smear a person, basically, and falsely smear them. So I think to an extent, the same thing maybe happened with Joe Kent. I'm not 100% certain on that. I saw, again, some posts regarding Joe Kent saying that his wife works for a left-wing media outlet and that she's actually a hardcore Democrat and hates Trump and the whole thing. Again, it seems odd that an individual who defended Donald Trump to the very end, by and large, and seems like an American patriot, would be married to a woman like that. But even so, if that's true, that's certainly strange. But I think the bigger problem, again, goes back to what I said earlier, which is the conversations that are not being had. Because again, when he sat down with Tucker Carlson, and I didn't watch the whole interview, I maybe only saw like 10 minutes of it, but they were talking again about the Donald Trump shooting and the Charlie Kirk shooting. And why is it that people aren't having conversations about those so-called shootings? Now, keep in mind, they're talking about them like they were real shootings, which clearly they were not. But they were bringing up things like, we're not even allowed to ask questions. When you work for the government, you're not even allowed to ask questions about it. And then, of course, they look back at each other and they just say, well, that's strange. That sure is strange. That seems strange. And the answer is, yeah, it is. But just say why it's strange. Answer the why. But they never do. They quite literally do everything except answer the question that they're asking. And they've asked the question 1,000 times over. Why can't we see this footage? Or why can't we know the name of this person? Or why can't we examine this forensic evidence? Or a lack of forensic evidence and XYZ? Again, it's obvious those shootings were fake. I could go through both of them all over again. I'm not going to do that. But it's beyond obvious. No exit wound for Charlie Kirk. And we're supposed to believe that an AR-15 round whizzed past Donald Trump's ear and only took off a piece of it. And if you look at his ear now, it doesn't look like anything is wrong with it whatsoever. Again, seems strange. But that's because, again, it was staged. He even said, I believe in the interview, the part that I caught was Joe Kent said that there was intel saying that they wanted to take a shot at Donald Trump with a sniper rifle from a rooftop at one of his rallies. Well, first of all, that wouldn't be out of the ordinary. That would have to be a scenario that the Secret Service and endless other three-letter agencies would already have worked out and would already know. So again, if you put yourself back in Butler, Pennsylvania, it's rather obvious that the good guys knew that someone was going to take a shot, which meant, why not stage it to make it look like a shot was really taken? Because again, the media was there. And the media was in on it. Again, CNN was there. They had a front row seat when they've never covered rallies before and weren't going to cover this one and whatever else, but all of a sudden they were all there. Why? Because they were told to be there. They were told that something was going to take place. And then, of course, it didn't go down the way that they thought. And then they get wrapped up again in all the communications and the Space Force intel that got gathered in the entire thing. They know exactly who was there and why they were there and what they were there to actually broadcast and witness and see. And again, if you know that a president of the United States is going to be shot at and you don't tell them, then that makes you complicit in the attempted murder of a sitting president. Same thing with the Charlie Kirk thing. Again, it was almost a mirror image of the exact thing, except the end of the storyline, so to speak, was slightly different. Again, Charlie Kirk's not dead either, and there's ample evidence that proves that. Even the stuff that Candace Owens released recently. So again, Candace Owens is in this group too, and it's very strange. Again, asks a lot of questions, but never asks the why, and never actually answers the questions that she asks. But the one thing, again, about all of them, too, is they consistently say no more wars for Israel, no more wars for Israel. That's good messaging. It's not relevant, I don't believe, in the current conflict that's taking place. Unless, of course, you know exactly what's going on in Iran and you understand that that's always been, again, a playground for Israel and Mossad and, other deep state actors and governments to do things, again, on an underground sort of blacklist basis and black market basis, certainly when it comes to oil and money and everything else. But even that's not discussed on Tucker Carlson's show. Even that's not brought up by Candace Owens or Megyn Kelly or, again, whomever. All these individuals, they just never bring it up. You always sort of get the same wavelength of messaging. And I'm not saying it's bad messaging, not when it comes to Israel and, again, no more Israel wars. That's all great and fine. And I agree with that. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is that they have to stay on that wavelength and on that point to get the American public to understand that Israel has been and is the problem. But again, I mean, if you're like me, I'm tired of the psychological operations. I'm tired of the lying, and I'm tired of the questions that just aren't being asked, and even more importantly, the questions that get asked that never receive an answer. That's the problem. Again, the moment I started watching that clip of Joe Kent and Tucker Carlson talking about the Trump shooting and Charlie Kirk, I mean, he says it with a level of certainty that is absurd. I mean, they assassinated Charlie Kirk, rather graphically, I might add. And I'm going, bro, please, come on. Do you not look at evidence? You work for the government, for God's sakes. I mean, do you not slow down and just say, wait a minute? Do you not know anything about psychological operations, false flags, fake shootings, fake disappearances of people? I mean, this is a thing. This is what government does. And there's motives for it, and there's reasons for it. My question is, and I think I have an answer, but I could be wrong, is why is it that those show hosts never entertain anybody who says anything slightly different about those events than what they say? And that would imply, again, that they are controlled to some extent. They have to be. Again, what are the odds that Tucker Carlson would never have a single guest on his show who would say the Butler shooting was obviously fake and the Charlie Kirk shooting was obviously fake and here's why, and then run down both of those psychological operations and then answer the questions? Why is it that a false flag like those and false flags like them would take place? What's the motive? What's the hidden agenda? Who is it supposed to flush out? Who is it supposed to expose? They never, ever have anybody on their shows ask that or say that or state that. Not ever. Again, they ask every question that you could possibly ask except for the only question they haven't asked. And then they don't answer it. Like I said in a previous episode, I think last week, Candace Owens will even go so far as to show footage from behind Charlie Kirk and that camera that was confiscated right after they hauled his body away, his still alive, very breathing body away. And you can see in the footage that there's no exit wound, there's no blood, there's nothing. So while she's describing the scenario of, again, it being strange, she's going, that seems strange, that seems strange. Why is it strange now? It's strange because he's not dead. And you just showed video footage of him not really dying. But you're still saying he's dead. This is the part, again, that would indicate that, again, these people are not only controlled, but they have to be controlled by somebody for some reason. And I could speculate as to why that's the case. Is it, again, designed to wake people up to psychological operations slowly? Is that it? Or is it designed to, get individuals to be more inquisitive and slow down and not act emotionally, but, again, just examine things piece by piece, a little at a time? Maybe. That might be it. Are they a part of the soft disclosure that's taking place where there will be some kind of a crescendo at the end of all of this where it will wake up a great deal of people in the blink of an eye? I don't know. But I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it, that the truth is the best form of good propaganda, to just tell it and to just say it. But the only reason, again, that they've never brought up Charlie Kirk being alive or Donald Trump not really being shot in the ear has to be because they've been told not to bring it up for some reason. And that some reason has to be because those are known psychological operations that were used to expose very bad people and bring bad people out of the cracks and then show them to the world, again, like an Erica Kirk. Most people didn't even know who she was. And then that fake shooting takes place, and then she's front and center 48 hours later for the very first time. And the vast majority of people were like, give me a break. She's clearly faking. This is not a widow because that's not how a widow behaves. So to bring it back to Joe Kent, I don't know his role in all of this, but it seems coordinated to some extent. But again, if they're saying that he was a leaker, well, that's what they said about Dan Caldwell. And now Dan Caldwell's just been rehired by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So what gives? Does that mean that Joe Kent is going to get hired by somebody, in the near future in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence? I mean, I don't know. But I do think that Tulsi Gabbard is one of the good ones. I think she's one of the good guys in all of this, so to speak. And again, there are congressmen and women on both sides of the aisle that go after her and try to get her to slip up and everything else. And of course, the media does too. All last week, the media was asking, again, Donald Trump whether or not he was going to fire Tulsi Gabbard. There's no reason to fire her. There's none. She's running point on one of the largest operations, at least at face value. The military's already done it, so it's over with. But she's running point on the slow walk of an active coup that occurred to take over the presidency and rid America, essentially, and certainly the office of the presidency of Donald Trump, both with election fraud and then, of course, the Russia hoax and all of that. I mean, she's running point on that. So when the media is screaming for her resignation, or congressmen and women on both sides of the aisle are trying to get her to trip up, even with Israel questions, because again, she entered office knowing that Israel is a huge problem and knowing that they were slaughtering people in Gaza. She's well aware of this. But when the cameras are on her and the lights are on her, she has to play a role. And she's doing that, and she's doing it rather well, I think. Which leads me to this now. I'm going to get off of that just for a minute, but again, it's just about the questions that don't get asked and then the ones that are never answered. I have no doubt that there's an ongoing psychological operation continuously taking place within other operations. But again, the problem with it is that you risk doing what probably any CIA analyst for psychological operations would do, is you risk alienating people. You risk individuals not being able to see the bigger picture, and then they end up dividing one another. When everybody, again, was generally moving in the same direction, some people will take an off-ramp, and then they just maintain that same wavelength of thought or action with everything that they do. So, again, no more wars for Israel. Yeah, of course. That's obvious. But it's obvious to us. And we're not the only ones that can see the bigger picture. In fact, there are endless people who probably still can't. There are endless people, again, screaming at the top of their lungs that Israel's our greatest ally, and they actually believe that. But I don't know. It's complicated, and it's tiresome, as one might expect, because psychological operations are. But you've got to know one when you see it. And you have to be able to play pinball and ping pong and bounce around from one idea to the next. But then you also have to pay attention to what ideas are never discussed, what ideas are never brought up. So again, don't let me do the thinking for you. I certainly don't want that. And don't let a Tucker Carlson do the thinking for you either. And don't let his guests do the thinking for you either. Like any presentation that anybody gives, you can hear 100% of a presentation and walk away with 10% that you think is thought-provoking. If that 10% makes sense, then great. But I don't walk into a Tucker interview necessarily or listen to his take on any particular subject and trust him wholeheartedly, because it's obvious, again, which questions he refuses to ask, let alone answer. So with that aside, sorry, a little more digression there. I wanted to get into the business of Robert Mueller, because apparently now he's dead, or at least the public's been told he's now dead. And I wanted to tell you a prevailing theory that was out there and has been out there for a very long time. And I say prevailing because there's plenty of evidence that this was the case. Robert Mueller was brought up in the Q posts over 140, I want to say 145 to 148 times. If you type in his name into the Q board in the search box, you'll see all those posts. And I recommend, again, switching them in order if one wanted to read all of them. I fully understand people won't. But back in the day when we were reading them in real time, it became rather obvious to us that Robert Mueller was probably a black hat for a very long time. And then when Donald Trump entered office, it became clear that Robert Mueller was recruited basically as a gray hat. And if you're unfamiliar with the term gray hat, it essentially means that you can either play both sides or you've been compromised by good guys, i.e. white hats, and then you're shifted into then being an individual who was once a black hat, but now you're not. So you're right in that gray area where you're still a bad dude, but you've basically been told you're going to do what we want you to do now by the good guys. And if you don't, we're going to kill you because we have more than enough information on you to kill you. Case in point, Robert Mueller was the FBI director during 9/11. So he knows what happened on 9/11. He knows 100%. He knows there were no planes. He knows there were no missiles and rockets, or there may have been a missile or at the very least an explosion at the Pentagon. He's aware of all of that. So they certainly had the goods on him, and they had plenty of things to hang over his head and say, Bobby, if you don't do what we want, we're going to tell everybody your role in this, or at the very least, we're just going to have you executed for treason and sedition and crimes against humanity and terrorism and XYZ. And they could have done that. But again, the theory, and it is rather, again, well established at this point, is that when Donald Trump took office, not only did endless congressmen and women on both sides of the aisle instantly resign, and they did, and the list was huge of resignations. And of course, they were all scared, as they should have been, because they had a pretty good idea as to what was potentially coming when it came to consequences, and they wanted nothing to do with it. But James Comey, of course, was the FBI director, and so he was left in for a little while, but Robert Mueller wasn't, and he wasn't affiliated with it anymore. So when it came to the whole Russia hoax thing, it was Donald Trump who appointed Robert Mueller. Now, why would he do that? Why would he appoint Robert Mueller to investigate the Russia hoax thing, that Russia interfered in our elections or blah, 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 which again was a completely made-up story? It's rather obvious that he did it because if Robert Mueller was the one running point in the eyes of the public and the brainwashed congressmen and women, then there would be essentially, again, no reason to complain, which means you could control Robert Mueller because he served for all those past presidents, certainly Obama's entire administration. And you bring him in so he's familiar with Democrats, so again, they wouldn't complain. And Republicans, again, could ask him questions that essentially he couldn't answer. And if anybody goes back and watches that entire Robert Mueller congressional hearing, where he's going through the entire investigation and all of the documentation, he can hardly remember any particular point on it, or he would even say things like, well, that wasn't something that we looked at and we weren't concerned with that. That would indicate, again, that entire thing, that entire investigation was not really designed to investigate Donald Trump. It was used to investigate the people who were behind the entire hoax, which wasn't Donald Trump. Robert Mueller was just, again, a piece on the board, but other people were moving him around. Now, let me get into this again just very quickly because, again, that's the prevailing theory here. What I did is I went to ChatGPT and I tossed in the web address that had all of the Robert Mueller Q posts in chronological order, all 140 plus of them. I put them in chronological order, and then I, of course, copied and pasted the web link into ChatGPT, and I said, based on the Q posts with Robert Mueller's name in them at this link, and then I provided it, what is the prevailing theory about Mueller? Was he a controlled white gray hat or a black hat? And here's what it said. It actually spit out the answer rather quick, and it read through those Q posts rather quick. It says, within the universe of QAnon posts, or Q drops, quote unquote, of course, QAnon's not a real thing, there isn't a single perfectly consistent interpretation of Robert Mueller, but there is a clear prevailing narrative with a few notable splits. It says the dominant prevailing Q interpretation is that Q repeatedly framed Mueller as not actually investigating Donald Trump, but instead secretly working with a broader plan, within a broader plan. It says in this narrative, Mueller's investigation was a cover operation, number one, a way to gather evidence against political opponents like Clinton, Obama, etc. And then it says this idea shows up widely in summaries of Q beliefs that Mueller and Trump were working together to expose the global cabal, quote unquote. And they have a Newsweek article that notes that. And then it says early Q explanations explicitly claimed that Mueller was appointed to investigate Democrats, not Trump. And then they have another article linked to that as well. It says, so in Q terminology, that places Mueller rather firmly in the white hat or controlled gray hat camp, aligned with the plan. It provides a couple of other, but again, it goes into less dominant theories and XYZ. It says, again, bottom line in the prevailing theory is that Mueller was a controlled white hat and part of Trump's plan. And then I asked it again. Well, it asked me, basically, do you want me to break down specific Q posts about Mueller and show how the interpretation shifted over time? I said, yeah, go ahead. And then it provided a timeline. And it says, phase one, early Q drops, late 2017 to early 2018. Mueller equals unknown, possibly on Trump's side. Early Q posts are deliberately ambiguous about Mueller, often asking leading questions like SC targeting who, SC on team, SC off team, Supreme Court meeting. Then it says this ambiguity invited followers to decode the answers themselves. What the community did with that is many concluded that Mueller was secretly aligned with Trump. The logic, Trump allowed the investigation. Therefore, it must serve the plan. Again, he was the one who appointed him. And of course, you would have to assume that much like any informant to a certain extent, or at the very least a figurehead, you would have to talk to him about what he was hearing and what he knew and what was going on. At the same time, making sure that he was surrounded with good individuals who could then gather all of that information on their own and corroborate whether or not what he was saying was legit. But at the exact same time, he's just a figurehead. It's not like Robert Mueller was really the one doing the investigating. He wasn't the one combing through data. And again, his entire hearing proved that he didn't know what the hell was going on by and large, thereby again showing that he wasn't really the one actually doing anything. So it backs up the theory. Again, I watched that entire hearing and it was fascinating. It was like, wow, he should know this. He should know exactly what's going on, and he should know the ins and outs and all of this other stuff. And then the media, after that entire hearing, basically imploded because, again, they were hoping that Robert Mueller would open up his giant binder, look at everybody and say Donald Trump, stole the election with the help of Russia and he's blackmailed and blah, blah, blah. And none of that happened. Everybody was embarrassed, which means the media then ran with the story that Robert Mueller has Alzheimer's disease. It was instantaneous. It was, well, he seemed all over the place. Is there something wrong with his health? And then they, again, justified it that way. And then it was all over with. And then Robert Mueller retired. And then reports came out that he was in an old folks' home with Alzheimer's and in the Alzheimer's wing of some old folks' home or whatever. And then that was it. And now he's dead at the age of 81. So the story goes. So again, could he have been executed many years previously? It's possible. It's also possible, again, that he was told to play ball. And he did. And it's possible that he did die of Alzheimer's in an old folks' home, and that's just the way that it is. That's possible too. But let me play this one little clip. It's only 2 minutes long. This is from the actual hearing itself. And this is John Ratcliffe when he was a congressman before becoming, of course, the CIA director. And he's asking Robert Mueller a very specific question. And the question is, again, pretty straightforward. You'll hear him say it, but he basically, again, says, what policy exists within the DOJ where you can say that somebody hasn't done something wrong or something illegal, but we aren't sure yet, so we're going to keep looking? You make a determination that they're not guilty of something, but then you say, well, that doesn't mean that they're not guilty. And he goes, show me what policy exists. And of course, there isn't a policy. So give this a listen in 3, 2, 1.
All right. Now, in explaining that special counsel did not make what you called a traditional prosecution or declination decision, the report on the bottom of page 2 of volume 2 reads as follows. The evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that prevent us from conclusively determining that no criminal conduct occurred. Accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. Now, I read that correctly?
Yes.
All right. Now, your report, and today you said at all times the special counsel team operated under, was guided by, and followed Justice Department policies and principles. So, which DOJ policy or principle sets forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined?
Can you repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah. Which DOJ policy or principle set forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined? Where does that language come from, Director? Where is the DOJ policy that says that? Let me make it easier.
Go ahead.
Can you give me an example other than Donald Trump where the Justice Department determined that an investigated person was not exonerated because their innocence was not conclusively determined?
I cannot, but this is a unique situation.
Okay, well, you can't. Time is short. I've got 5 minutes. Let's just leave it at you can't find it because I'll tell you why. It doesn't exist. The special counsel's job, nowhere does it say that you were to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or that the special counsel report should determine whether or not to exonerate him. It's not in any of the documents. It's not in your appointment order. It's not in the special counsel regulations. It's not in the OLC opinions. It's not in the Justice Manual, and it's not in the principles of federal prosecution. Nowhere do those words appear together because respectfully, Director, it was not the special counsel's job to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or to exonerate him, because the bedrock principle of our justice system is a presumption of innocence. It exists for everyone. Everyone is entitled to it, including sitting presidents.
Again, the psychological operations are taking place constantly with everything that we're seeing all of the time. You cannot believe anything really at face value. And we're being bombarded with it all. Again, it's constant. I'll just leave it at that. It's exhausting, and it is all of the time. And again, you don't have to have read the Q posts back then when they first came out. And I understand again that it's exhausting because there are those of us who did, and we had the time to do it, and we did it. So again, instead of watching a 3-hour baseball game, I would read Q posts, and then I would dive into online posts and see what people were discussing, and I knew where to go to get that information. I understand that a lot of people didn't, but maybe that's one of the purposes of this show, like it is a lot of shows that exist, is we're supposed to use these boards to go back to educate people on what we were being told and what we were investigating back then, and then what's actually happening now and how it makes sense to us. It wouldn't make sense to a person who didn't read the Q post back then. People, again, would be more inclined to believe things at face value, not ask questions, and just turn on Fox News and believe it. Or listen to a Tucker Carlson even, and believe everything that he says too. But let me read this particular Q post because, again, this is, there's a couple that are rather long, but this one is a shorter one, and this is the second Q post with Robert Mueller's name in it. And it's post 18, which was from November 1st of 2017. And again, it's rather telling, and it asks a number of different questions, all questions, as a matter of fact. It says, quote, why did Mueller meet with POTUS 1 day prior to FBI announcement if Mueller could not be offered director due to previous term limits rule? I think he served for like 8 years as the FBI director. He was through Bush, and then he was mostly through Obama, but he couldn't, again, serve again. So why is it, again, we're being asked, why is it that he specifically met with the President of the United States? And of course, who else was in the room is another question, I guess. But the Post goes on and it says, why is Pelosi begging for a new special counsel? What is Pelosi's net worth? How was this obtained given salary as career official? Why is Pelosi's memory going? Could it protect against prosecution? How so? What if John McCain's surgery was fake? Why would this occur? What could this prevent potentially? What is the Mayo Clinic? And then it says who sits on the board of directors there. And then that's the end of the post. The point is that within those posts, we were being told a great deal of things through the Socratic method. And we were again being shown, don't look at things at face value. Understand that there's something else going on here. That there are, again, multiple operations taking place. People are being compromised. People are being, again, sniffed out, and they're being used for particular purposes. And those purposes tend to be for very good reasons, again, to expose a great deal of things and divulge evidence and, endless other reasons. But it's the accountability piece that, again, everybody longs for here, a public accountability. Again, the talk of election fraud isn't going away. It's almost daily, which means something is going to pop when it comes to election fraud. The good guys already have all the information. They know exactly what's going on. There was 2024 election fraud, 2020 election fraud. There was probably, again, election fraud certainly back in 2016. The sheer reactions from the Democrats and the people on the left when Hillary Clinton lost would indicate that they, again, thought they had it all wrapped up through voter fraud, among other things. But they were wrong. So again, just in summary, the psychological operations aren't going to stop. They are constant. I don't like them. Most people don't. But unfortunately, there are still people who don't know that they're taking place. All you have to do to figure out whether or not an individual is involved in one, and whether or not, again, a particular show exists for pushing a particular storyline or a wavelength of thought, is just try to figure out what questions they refuse to ask, let alone answer. What subjects do they never even approach? And we know, too, that voter fraud is one subject, certainly, that the left never approaches. And if they do approach, it's not that they're engaging in a psychological operation as much as they are just engaging in gaslighting. So I want to mention this again regarding voter fraud, because here on Monday, on the 23rd of March here, they're going to have a Supreme Court case that is titled Watson versus Republican National Committee, or Watson versus RNC. And it says the following here. This case involves oral arguments on whether states can legally count mail-in absentee ballots that arrive after Election Day as long as they are postmarked by Election Day. Specifically, it challenges a Mississippi law allowing such ballots to be received and counted up to 5 days after Election Day if postmarked on time. The Republican National Committee and others argue this violates federal law, like 2 U.S.C. subsection 7 and 3 U.S.C. subsection 1, which sets a uniform Election Day, quote-unquote, as the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, implying that ballots must be received by then for federal elections. It says Mississippi, and similar laws in about 14 to 16 other states for general votes, or voters rather, plus more for military overseas, defends the grace period, quote-unquote, as practical for mail delays, especially post-COVID expansions. Again, that was part of the COVID lie. Part of the entire COVID lie was to usher in voter fraud through mail-in ballot. Most of us already know that, but you'd be surprised how many people don't know that. Again, when you run one psychological operation, you're not running it for just one reason. There are endless spider webs. I mean, it's a giant Venn diagram of all of the different strategies that they have and all of the different elements that are inside of that singular Trojan horse, and voter fraud, of course, was one of them. And then it says a ruling could impact how mail ballots are handled in multiple states ahead of the 2026 midterms, federal election day, November 3rd, 2026. A decision likely won't come until June or later. It says this follows a related January 2026 ruling in Bost versus Illinois State Board of Elections, where the court 7-2 granted candidates standing to challenge similar late ballot counting rules, but didn't resolve the merits. So again, if you're ever interested in hearing the Supreme Court justices themselves bring up these cases, me personally, I like going to the Forbes YouTube channel, and you can get some of the audio clips there. Again, you can hear the lawyers make their cases. You can hear the questions that the justices ask them. And of course, they probably air the entire thing live on their website too. But it really is interesting listening. I remember when I was in graduate school, I was listening to a number of their cases live as they were actually happening. And again, it's a fascinating process. It's a bit dull from time to time, and there's a lot of legalese, of course, and then they're having conversations about things that they know about and other legal briefs and other legal cases that they are, of course, familiar with that we are not. But it's still interesting. And of course, this is going to be a big decision when it comes down. Unfortunately, it's still happening the way that voting is essentially taking place right now, if states haven't changed their rules already, is that primaries are already happening. But again, hopefully there's less fraud. And hopefully, again, things are going to be more on the up and up here with not only primary votes, but the upcoming midterm elections as well. Time will tell on all of that. But again, you have to assume that there's sort of always going to be fraud, and it hopefully becomes more obvious as to which particular races engage in the fraud and which ones don't. Again, if you think that the enemy is going to go out quietly without swinging, I'd say you got another thing coming. They're going to keep swinging, they're going to dig in like ticks, and they're going to keep cheating because that's the only thing that they know how to do. That's exactly why they defunded the Department of Homeland Security, and they haven't funded it yet. Because if there's an attack, they can blame it on Donald Trump. Again, this is coming from the so-called Democrats, but as we know, it's coming from Republicans as well. Or so-called Republicans anyway, so-called conservatives. They're Republicans in name only. But again, they are our enemy. It's government. It's mind control. That's the point. Not to mention, I would like to have ICE agents at airports. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. Donald Trump said he was going to do that, and he should. It should happen immediately. You talk about deterrence. I mean, my God, illegal aliens aren't going to be showing up. Somalis aren't going to be showing up. They'll get arrested. But they'll be dumb enough that they'll actually show up and think that they can slide through, but they'll get arrested. This is a good thing. I bet the rental car business is going to take a bit of a bump. You might want to put some stock in Enterprise Rent-A-Car or Hertz or something, because you can guarantee the Somalis are going to try to get rental cars and try to, I don't know, drive them into the ocean and drive back to whatever sandbox they came from, because they're not going to want to get on planes. This is one hell of a move that he's making. So yeah, I hope it sticks, and I hope he keeps doing it. Okay, let me move on to education here. A couple of local things, and then I want to round it out with a piece of audio from Stephen Miller, and then basically describe, again with all due respect, how he's wrong on a particular issue. Again, what he says in this clip, which I'll play here in a little bit, is nice, and it sounds good, but it's not possible, because the entire business is lost, and it can't be recovered. You cannot reform it, as I have said here on the show. I've laid out all the reasons why that's the case. And you can't provide brain transplants to the individuals who work within the business, because now the business is filled with a particular ideology that is poison, because the environment is poisonous. So that's, that should be rather clear at this point. What I did locally, though, regarding Jason Mers, the elementary school principal who is returning to his position, of course, is I obtained through an open records request his contracts, his previous contract and his current contract. In the last board meeting on Thursday night, which I watched in its entirety, and it was beyond embarrassing. First of all, just as a side note, the two presentations that existed at the beginning were remarkably embarrassing, I thought. One of them had to do with sports ball, who cares? And then the other one had to do with what's going on at the middle school. And it's, again, one of these just fluff presentations. Nothing bad ever happens. There's no honesty. It's, oh, look at all the good things we're doing. The sad part is the only good thing that should be happening within any school is academic achievement of teaching the truth and learning the truth. But that will never happen because the truth isn't taught, and it certainly isn't taught properly, even if it were, because, again, as we all know, if you teach the truth in American schools, you lose your job. So with that said, the principal over there, who's completely worthless, her name is Pam Thurer. She's also one of the Title IX coordinators for the district. She's basically hanging on for retirement. Apparently no one likes her, and she's a complete tool. And she was just, again, showing pictures of students doing activities, and, oh, look at the fun that we're engaging in, and blah, blah, blah. And then it was either her or somebody else said that actually one of the rewards that students get is that if they academically achieve or they have positive behavior through the PBIS programs and all this other nonsense, and this fake monopoly money that they use for absolute bullshit, is they get to go outside and walk around the edge of the woods looking for Sasquatch. I shit you not. That's an actual activity. Now, yes, it's a joke and it's a complete waste of time, but that's because that's school. Because school is a joke and a waste of time. So theoretically, it actually fits that they would walk around looking for Sasquatch even as a joke. It's a joke on top of a joke on top of a joke, within a joke. It's a drawing of a picture of a hologram. It's stupid. And again, that was the presentation. And then it was a round of applause by some people, and then that was it. It's embarrassing. But anyway, board member Dawn King, the only ethical and logical one there, she ended up catching the board members and the superintendent lying on two separate occasions. And this is, again, a bit technical, but it does matter. In any school board meeting, if you've ever watched one, and basically if you watch two school board meetings from any location, it could be even the same location, you'll pick up on this trend. That every single time that they approve contracts of employees within their district, they group them all together. And they'll group all the contracts together and all of the names and all of the positions, and they'll say, okay, we're going to vote on these contracts. Let's call for the vote. What they never do, which they should do, is they should individualize each individual person and each individual contract and have board members, again, basically make a vote or voice their opinion on the individuals who are up for a vote to receive a contract. Again, that typically doesn't happen because they're just grouped together for the sake of laziness and speeding up the process. And then, unfortunately, the board blindly believes the superintendent and that the superintendent has done everything that they're supposed to do when it comes to, again, vetting these people, proper background checks, even a Google search of their character history, which they don't do in many cases either, as I've proven here on the show with the actions of the local school district. But it goes on in endless school districts. And then there are, again, other school districts that do look up a person's personal character on the internet to see if there are red flags. And then they typically, again, don't hire those people, or they hire them accidentally, not knowing that information, and then they fire them later. Either way, in the board meeting itself, the contracts came up, and Jason Merz's contract was the first contract to receive a renewal. Again, it was, I believe, a new 5-year contract. So the last 5 years, he's been making $92,000 in change every single year as an elementary school principal in a school district that only has 3 elementary schools. That's a lot of money. But now that the Title IX investigation has wrapped up, and it concluded that there was no wrongdoing, not because he didn't do it, but because there was no other evidence to show that he did it, like enter the bathroom because there was no security footage, there were no other witnesses, no one else could be interviewed who, again, could have been a witness, but there were no witnesses. And as a result of all of that, they exonerated him by basically saying, again, there's not enough evidence. But an exoneration, as we all know, doesn't mean that there still isn't a risk, and there most certainly is a risk. So now they've given him a 5-year contract extension to return to the same position to the tune of $117,500 and change. He's making a $35,000 give or take raise. Or again, it could be just in the step process, but either way, he's making that much more money as an elementary school principal. Elementary school principals don't make $117,500, ladies and gentlemen. Not in small, college town, rural environments, suburban environments. It doesn't happen. That's too much money. Now, I have some pretty good ideas as to why I think he's getting paid that amount of money. But either way, what Dawn King ended up doing, which is exactly what she should have done, and everybody should have done it, is she asked for his contract to be separated from the rest. And then the board president, Rebecca Howard, said, yes, that would be fine. When in the past, they've argued with her and said, no, we're not separating out contracts. You can't do that. But this time, she allowed it. And then they voted on it. Now, before I get to the vote, one of the board members who won the last election, Matt Wyatt, wasn't there. At least, he wasn't in the room during the meeting. I don't know if he was in the building. I don't know if he wasn't in the building. But he wasn't in the room during the meeting, which means he wasn't present for any vote or any discussion or anything. So when it came time to vote for Jason Merz's contract, Dawn King was the only one to say no. Matt Wyatt wasn't there, and the other 3 nitwits voted yes. And that was it. So that you had the majority. So his contract is in place starting July 31st of 2026 here, where he's going to be making $17,500, $117,500 and change. As I said in the previous episode, I think the levee is going to break on this eventually. You cannot place back any employee in any position who could pose a threat to students. You cannot do it. But these people are willing to die on this hill. And this is the hill they will die on, metaphorically. This will be the end of their careers. They're doing it without my help. All I have to do is just step out of the way, let them behave the way they behave, and then expose it when they behave the way that they do, and then that's the end of it. It's very easy catching these people be very stupid because they do it so publicly. But I find it interesting that Matt Wyatt wasn't there for the vote. I have a theory on that. And it just turns out that Matt Wyatt's wife is the lead legal counsel for Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Apparently. Which means, if they read any of my Substack articles, she probably looked at him and said, do not vote for his contract. Let anybody else vote. You know Dawn will say no. Let the rest of them vote for his contract, but you need not be there, because if you vote yes and he reoffends or something else ends up happening, you're going to be on the raw end of that stick and on the wrong side of history, which is exactly what I've written on Substack. And if he's listening to this, well, Matt, you're still on the wrong side of history, whether you voted for him or not. You're involved. Because here's the question, ladies and gentlemen. How many people read the Title IX? How many people on that board read the full Title IX from top to bottom before voting on his contract? The answer is 0. Allegedly 0. Because Don King has never received the Title IX. The only way anybody else has received it is if they received it behind closed doors privately, which they're not supposed to do. In fact, that violates endless Ohio revised codes, and it violates endless codes of conduct for both the superintendent and any other employee like a Pam Thur, who's the Title IX coordinator. If they release the Title IX to board members secretly and not all of the board members, they've broken the law. Not to mention, again, you got to ask yourself this one too. How many board members read a full Title IX investigation at its conclusion, or do they just read the conclusion of the conclusion, which is basically a paragraph long that says, based on the preponderance of evidence, there was no wrongdoing and we don't rule against Jason Mers, the end. And that's essentially all it says. And then they act on that and that alone. Is that acting with all of the evidence at your disposal? No. You're not even supposed to make a vote on anybody's contract if you haven't even read the Title IX investigation yet. I've asked for the Title IX twice, and they've told me the same thing, that it's still being reviewed and it's still being edited and it's still being redacted as to not violate FERPA. We'll see about that. But again, there might be full pages that are completely redacted. Even so, every school board member in America, when there is a Title IX investigation in the school district, they all not only have the right, but they have the responsibility to read the full, unredacted Title IX investigation from beginning to end. And they're allowed to take as long as they want. And what I've been told, and what I've already written about based on what I've been told, is that nobody would vote to bring back Jason Mers or anybody like him after being investigated for this, given the level of specificity and detail that is in it, based on the child's own account. You're talking about a huge legal risk. And then, of course, just sociology in general, and what will human beings do as a result. So again, if they think that voting for him and bringing him back to, again, extend his contract and pay him even more money on a higher pay scale for another year of teaching is a good idea, or that it somehow exonerates him even more because why would we ever pay a pedophile or an alleged pedophile such money? We would never do that, and this just proves that he didn't do anything wrong. No. That's not what that means. What it means is you're determined to look like you're right without even reading all of the evidence. That's reckless. That's just plain stupid. That's like walking into the middle or end of a movie and looking at the crowd, turning off the movie when you've never seen it, and tell everybody how the whole thing actually ended up, or what the plot of the whole movie was, and who all the characters are, and what they did and what they didn't do. You would have no knowledge of it whatsoever. And what's interesting, too, in this situation, which again transpired during the board meeting, is Don King called out the superintendent for lying and caught him lying. And it had to do with, again, the previous board meeting, the one before this last Thursday, where the superintendent told the entire board that they had to approve all contracts by March, including administrative contracts, 5-year contracts specifically by March, in March. That's a lie. It's June. District policy says June 1st or somewhere around there in the month of June, but it's not March. So then Don King called him out and said, you were wrong. Now we have to go back into the minutes of the last board meeting and change those minutes and revise those minutes, because in that agenda, it says that that based on board policy, we have to whatever. We have to vote on all these contracts in March, when that's not true. It's June. So you have a superintendent lying, openly lying to an entire board And none of them fire him because they're all in it together except for Dawn King. She's the only one calling any of these people out. And their collusion is crystal clear here. It's crystal flippin' clear. If you have a superintendent lying to a board who are the boss of a superintendent, you fire the superintendent. It's not difficult. The only reason they don't is because no one wants to work here. Nobody. And they all have dirt on each other. And they all use one another, and they all support one another, no matter the cost. That's not an honest environment. Because when everybody's thinking alike, someone's not thinking. So that was the first thing that Dawn King called them out on. And then the second thing was, again, board president Rebecca Howard, regarding her unwillingness and her not likely attitude to separate out contracts during a vote. I think she used the word, "I'm not inclined," in an email exchange with Dawn King, where on the stage, Dawn King read those emails from Rebecca Howard, where she said, "I'm not inclined to separate out the contract votes and vote on them individually. I'm not inclined to do that." Now, when you hear somebody say you're not inclined to do something, doesn't that mean you're not going to do it? Of course it does. So once again, Dawn called her out on this and read the email verbatim. Rebecca Howard, the board president of Talawanda School District, she's arguably one of the dumbest people on the face of the planet. She actually tried to justify what that meant and rationalize what that meant. Just because I said I'm not inclined to doesn't mean that I never would. Okay. No one believes that. That's what a narcissistic, sociopathic gaslighter would say. That's all. That's what they would say. Because again, she doesn't think she's ever wrong. Even when you read her own writing in her own email, showing a dislike and an unwillingness and no enthusiasm, again, not inclined to separate out votes when it comes to individualized contracts for school employees. It's ridiculous. But that's the environment. The environment is ridiculous. So I'm going to leave it there for now, but I'm telling you, God is in control of this one, and he's not going to let Jason Mers off the hook, and he's not going to let this school district off the hook. The parents, though, in this school district had better wise up. They're either fat, dumb, and lazy, and so brainwashed that they're going to send their own children back into that environment, or the exact opposite is going to happen, and you're going to have a shitstorm on your hands. And I can't wait for that. Now that leads me to this. This is the Stephen Miller clip that I wanted to play. Again, it's only 20 seconds long. I'm not sure when this took place, but he's speaking to the media. Carolyn Levitt is to his left. I would assume this is from a while ago, but either way, it might not be. Again, I'm not sure of the timing. It's just the message is what I want you to hear, and then I want to respond to it. And you can ask yourself, again, based on everything that I just said about this one little local school district where I live, give what he says a listen, and then ask yourself whether or not this is even plausible. In 3, 2, 1.
Children will be taught to love America. Children will be taught to be patriots. Children will be taught civic values for schools that want federal taxpayer funding. So as we close the Department of Education and we provide funding to states, we are going to make sure that these funds are not being used to promote communist ideology. For any nation to be successful, it cannot teach its children to hate themselves and to hate their country. So these are a few of the areas in which President Trump has fought the cancerous, communist, woke culture that was destroying this country, where we were led to believe that men were women, that women were men, that racial discrimination was good, that merit was bad, and that safety and physical security matter less than the feelings of liberal ideologues.
Again, it sounds nice. It sounds nice. It's just not going to happen. It would require a complete reversal in basically everything that government has already shown the people when it comes to any kind of investigation, or if you don't do what we tell you, you're going to lose federal funding threat. That threat rings hollow because, again, if it happens, it only happens on grand scales, typically involving quote-unquote anti-Semitism. Harvard, Columbia, whatever. It doesn't happen in a local school district in Ohio, for example, that still uses diversity, equity, and inclusion language, which they're not supposed to use anymore. Under the threat, of course, of a loss of federal funds because they're not adhering to an executive order, let alone state law. So schools are still breaking the law today regarding the diversity, equity, and inclusion language. Talawanda School District is breaking the law every single day in all of their paperwork by still having that language present. They just don't have the word diversity anymore. They have equity and inclusion, and then there's another word instead of diversity. I think it's respect. Respect, equity, and inclusion, or inclusion and equity. They changed one word, and then they flipped the other two words. That's all they did. So again, when Stephen Miller says we're gonna take away federal funding if you're teaching students to hate America, hate one another, not trust anybody, blah, blah, blah. I would say that's never going to happen because, again, schools are already breaking the law and they're already not losing federal funding. And they're all doing it. Every school district violates FERPA. Every single one of them. And when you tell the federal government with evidence which treasurers, which employees, and which school districts have violated FERPA, what are the consequences? There aren't any. There aren't any. The consequences are supposed to be a loss of employment for the people who engaged in FERPA violations. That's the first thing you do. You fire the individuals who did it, and then you tell everybody why they got fired, as if to send a message of deterrence to every other employee that if you fuck around, you're going to find out. But they don't do that either. It's just strongly worded letters, it's warnings, it's a wrist slap at the most. Taking away federal funding, it's not going to happen. Again, I wish it would, but it won't. You would have to have a massive school district engaging in a massive amount of fraud that would be undeniable, even to a layperson. And even then, you might not have them lose any federal funding. The state would intervene because, again, things are becoming more localized, which, as I've said before, doesn't mean the problem is going to go away. It's going to get worse, certainly before anything improves. But I don't think anything is going to improve. And the next reason why that's not plausible, his suggestion, albeit, again, sounds nice, is you would have to engage in a brain transplant of every single human being who works within the school environment. And that's not possible either. They're already lobotomized by and large, but you would have to replace their brain and unbrainwash them and reprogram them properly. But that's not possible. Because you're asking an individual to not be who they've become. And that's, again, that's a difficult nut to crack. And they are nuts. There's no doubt about that. But it's also who the business attracts. The business itself, teacher education programs, all of it, they tend to not be conservative in the slightest. If you ask questions in the business, you lose your job. If you question particular things, or again, you teach the truth, as I've said a million times before, and as you know, you lose your job. All it takes is one parent complaint. Dr. Brooks said this in the classroom, and I don't teach my kids that, and so he's not allowed to say that. And why is he saying that? Because he's not supposed to say that, and I disagree with him. And then before you know it, a teacher gets fired for trying to open up the eyes of their students, which means, are they really students? The answer is no, they're not. They're pawns in a very sadistic, satanic game that is only avoidable if you don't participate. But again, you need the brainwashed to deliver the brainwashing instruction. And the threat of a loss of federal funding, I'm telling you, these school districts don't care about those threats. They don't care because they're already violating any previous threat that has already existed. Hell, you have a school district who's bringing back an elementary school principal to the same position in the same building where, in my opinion, he sexually assaulted a child in a bathroom stall while jacking off at the same time. This is a problem. That's not a district that's going to lose federal funding. Not unless something else happens and the levee breaks. Again, these schools across America, ladies and gentlemen, are conspirators. They're conspirators to commit fraud. They are conspirators to hide illegality, cover up sexual abuse, and endless other crimes. That's why that entire argument, which I've said before, usually around election time, where people ring the bell and they hit the panic button, having to do with a loss of a school district and your property taxes being diminished, or rather your property value, I should say, being diminished. It's a complete and utter lie. Schools are criminal organizations. When you take a criminal organization away from a town, a city, or a living environment, the value of every property increases because you're getting rid of a criminal organization. It's not difficult. This isn't hard to figure out. That's just a line and an absolute lie that people get told and they blindly believe it. I can't imagine living in a house in a town that doesn't have a school district. I can. It's called heaven. That's what it's called. It's called heaven. The only way that such a proposal could possibly exist is if the entire system collapsed. It has nothing to do with removing the Federal Department of Education. That's not going to fix the problem. It's a good move, but it's not going to fix the problem. Again, you would have to engage in a complete reprogramming, a complete destruction of every teacher education program in every single university and college from here to Timbuktu. You would have to reprogram every single individual doing the instruction, every single student attempting to go or wanting to go, every single student who then obtains a job after graduating, and then the current teaching population and administrative population and school boards that exist across the United States. Is that going to happen? Of course not. It just won't. So, again, it's not a black pill, it's just reality. It isn't going to happen. There might be one or two schools that lose federal funding or they're threatened. Chicago public schools, Los Angeles County public schools in California, the big ones. The ones in Virginia that are always in the news for, raping kids and allowing trannies to use whatever bathroom they want. Stuff like that. Those are going to be the ones that hit the news cycle, but not your local school district that's engaging in the same amount of crime. They're going to be left generally untouched, which is a shame. Because again, they're criminal organizations. They steal. They're thieves. No way around it. There's just no way around it. Okay. I'm going to end with this one. This was interesting, and this was from last month, but I just came across it, and it's worth bringing up, and it certainly raises a very excellent point, which has to do with our innate DNA and why God actually made us and what he didn't make us for. This is from the X channel More Births, and the name fits the actual research article itself. There was a research article that was titled Fertility and Family Labor Supply. There were 3 authors, and it was authored in, or at least published on December 19th of 2025. I want to read you the abstract very quickly. It says, we study how fertility decisions interact with labor supply and human capital accumulation of men and women. First, we use longitudinal Danish register data and tax reforms to show the increases in wages of women decrease fertility, while increases in wages of men increase fertility. Second, we estimate a life cycle model to quantify the importance of fertility adjustments for labor supply and long-run gender inequality. Wage elasticities of women are more than 10% lower if fertility cannot be adjusted. Finally, we show that the long-term consequences of human capital depreciation around childbirth is an important driver of the long-run gender wage gap in the model. Now, here's what they ended up finding, which is actually the most important point of the study, is that when men, of course they said it in the abstract, but it was only one line, when men are offered more money or they make more money, both they and their spouse, female, are more likely to have more kids and want to have more kids. Whereas when women are in the workplace and they make more money, they don't want to have any kids, or I should say far less. They include a chart in this breakdown, and it shows a 5% increase in wages of women, and then a 5% increase in wages of men. And what it again shows is that when that increase occurs among men, they maintain and increase their interest in wanting to have children, whereas again with women, it decreases. So, not in summary, because I want to read the rest of this, but this is the lie of feminism. It's designed to brainwash women into believing that men don't want to get married and don't want to have children, when the exact opposite is true, regardless of the amount of money that they make. That it actually shows that men, again, whether they are less skilled or highly skilled, doesn't matter, they still want children. But when women are paid more money and receive, again, pay raises, they are less likely to have children because that already compounds their existence within the workforce. When, again, women entering the workforce, certainly the way that they have since the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, that's feminism. That increase was deliberate. It was brainwashing. It was designed to get women to not want to get married and to not have children. Didn't work for all of them, but it worked for a great deal, did it not? Again, it's just a part of that satanic feministic trap. That if you dangle a carrot in front of their face, they'll lunge for it. And some will lunge for it more than others. But they're going against the natural order of things. They're going against what is actually innate in most human beings, and certainly, again, within our own DNA. That's why women were created the way that they were. That's why men were created the way that they were. They were not created to work in cities in high-rises. I'd go so far as to say that's not what men were created for either. Certainly not men, again, who wanted to reproduce. But based on the study, again, it doesn't matter how much money a man makes. They're interested in reproduction. Is it all of them? Of course not. Are all women interested in that? No. But as one of the other authors brings up, who's written about this particular study, is they bring up the term opportunity cost and what opportunity cost actually means. That opportunity cost, again, is that there is a cost, always a cost, to one's perception of what they believe to be an opportunity. If someone believes that money is an opportunity, and making more money is a good opportunity, or getting a different job that makes more money is an opportunity, well, there's going to be a cost to that. As it turns out, lowered birth rates. That's the unfortunate cost. That's the toll. The paper goes into things, too, by basically saying, again, bringing up other social issues regarding it, saying that women in the workplace, that if they receive maternity leave, then that would increase fertility as well, and the likelihood of them, again, wanting to have children. That makes sense, I guess, and that's fine. The problem is that what, of course, happens with those children then once they're born? They're raised by other people then. They're not really raised by the mother because, again, the mother is on maternity leave for X amount of time, and then they just go right back into the working environment, and then the child is raised by someone else, again, in a daycare or another family member or what have you. That, too, disrupts, again, the natural order, I think, of God's design to a great extent. So is there going to be, again, a cost to that perception of what they, again, might perceive to be as a workplace opportunity with increased maternity leave or pay or, things of that nature? Yeah, there's going to be a cost to that also. Again, it's a step in the right direction with something like maternity leave pay. I won't deny that. And it's a step in the right direction, I think, too, when Trump has President Trump has these savings accounts for children. That it's basically, again, like a stock option for children. And then by the time, again, they're 18 or they're in their 20s, that hopefully that money has multiplied. And again, it's basically like a 401k for a newborn. I think that's a good idea, too. And again, would that have a positive outlook or certainly a perceived positive opportunity for individuals to want to have bigger families and more kids? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. That too, again, is a good thing in a positive direction. It's not the old way of doing things, which I think is unfortunate because I'm old school like that. But it's telling. It's just telling. And yes, it does basically, again, indicate that feminism and taxing women in the workforce and increasing work and, again, even increasing a so-called incentive like an increasing pay, it gives them the perception that they don't need children and they're less likely to want to reproduce. But I think, fortunately, there's a renaissance taking place here. And that's part of the positive thing here about the Great Awakening, is that people have woken up to the lie of feminism. They've woken up to the programming. They turn on their television, they turn on a movie, they see a particular image, they see a particular behavior, and it turns them off. And then they turn it off. And then they say, I don't want that, because I know where that's going to lead. And it's not going to lead to a good place, and I don't think I'm going to be happy because I want to do this instead. Get married, have children, settle down, things of that nature, and do so at a younger age. Which I also, again, think is something that is a trend. And it, of course, happens from generation to generation. It has its ebb and flows and its ups and downs and the whole thing. But I think feminism is alive and well, but at the same time, it's an ever existing fight and a battle. And it really is a biblical one. I mean, it occurs on multiple levels and multiple dimensions. And I'll just end it with that. But I have no doubt that there's a renaissance taking place and that people are learning. And again, hopefully looking at their surroundings and looking at society and saying, this is what I'm interested in and this is what I'm not interested in. And certainly when you start reading about agendas of depopulation and destroying the family, I mean, there was even a paper released by the CIA, it was unclassified by the CIA recently, basically saying that women who want to get married and want to have children are a threat. Although more specifically, it characterizes them as what is called, and this is an acronym, REMVE, REMVE, which is white, racially, and ethnically motivated violent extremism. I'm not kidding. Again, a specific category, it says here, of domestic terrorism ideology. It examines how extremist groups promote traditional motherhood, quote unquote, homemaking, and high birth rates, tied to great replacement conspiracy theories as recruitment, radicalization, and propaganda tools to grow their movement and involve women. So, if you have conversations, this is again according to an unclassified CIA document here, as a part of the October 2021 intelligence assessment, which was specifically titled Women Advancing White Racially and Ethnically Motivated Violent Extremism, Radicalization, and Recruitment. That if you have conversations about not wanting to enter the workforce, and if you have conversations about being a traditional mother, wife, homemaker, that you're a radical extremist, and anybody promoting any of that is a radical racial extremist. Homewives of white supremacy, quote unquote. Again, I'm going to leave it there, but that's what government thinks of people. That's what our government and the CIA actually believe. Again, if you're having open conversations about this kind of stuff, then they think you're a nut job. They think that you're a threat to society. We're not a threat to society. We're a threat to the enemy. We're a threat to them. That's why they say what they say, and that's why we do what we do. And that's the ongoing civil war. And it's not going away anytime soon. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening as always, and I'll catch you on Wednesday. Peace. Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.